Hello. Thank you, everyone, so much for being with us today. We have a packed discussion, so before we begin, I just want to give everyone on stage a brief moment to introduce themselves.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Heather Doshay. I'm a partner of people and talent at SignalFire. We're an early-stage venture capital firm whose focus is on Beacon AI, our own in-house data platform that tracks hundreds of millions of data points around people and companies to inform investment decisions, revenue, and who to hire, which is why we're here today. My full-time role is leading a team that's 100% focused on helping companies build high-performance organizations. So I'm super excited about this topic. My prior roles were all operator roles at venture-backed startups. Most recently, Webflow, where I was the first people and talent hire that joined the company at seed and helped them grow up through a unicorn valuation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Illovsky. I am the talent partner at CapitalG, Alphabet's independent growth equity fund. I have been on the venture side of talent for a relatively long time now. I started in executive search and spend my time mostly on org design, C-level exec hiring, and helping our founders build really strong, resilient C-suites and boards.
Hey everyone, I'm Roger Lee. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Comprehensive. We make compensation management software that helps companies make better pay decisions to ensure that their compensation is competitive, fair, and transparent. We also track salary data across 5,000 tech companies, which we publish for free on our website at comprehensive.io. I'm also the creator of a website called layoffs.fyi, which tracks all the layoffs in the tech sector.
Which we both love that website.
We're big fans.
And of course, I just want to remind everyone that we are doing a Q&A after, so start thinking about questions you might want to ask these lovely panelists. But to begin, I want to pose a question that has been making the rounds for the last few years. Where does everyone here stand on remote work and return to the office? And do employees actually need to be in the office in order for a company to be successful?
In my opinion, I think it's a bit of a know your company, right? And so for me, I like remote work, I like in-office work, I like hybrid work, but I think it depends on your workforce, your exec team, and honestly, you as a founder, CEO team, what your preference is and how you want to work. I don't think in-office is necessary for everyone. I think there are some cases where if that's necessary for you, that's absolutely necessary for you, and that's your line, and it's perfectly okay for it to be your preference.
Yeah, I think similar to Lauren, you can do whatever strategy works for you, but you should be remote ready. And what I mean by that is that even if you have an in-office culture, if on one day someone is out sick and they decide to work from home that day, and then you need to have Zoom calls or work asynchronously, you should be ready to have that. Because right now, it's really actually quite easy to hire a majority of roles because the market is in favor of the employer. But tomorrow, when it spikes back up like it would have been maybe in 2021 and it's hard to hire, you're going to be differentiated if you can hire remote and kind of flip that on. And so I'm very bullish on remote work, but I also understand the value of all three models between remote, hybrid, and in-office.
I think, though, something important is you worked in a remote-first company.
3.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so you have seen firsthand how effective it was even before COVID when you were in that leadership role.
Yeah, I think the companies that were forced into remote because of the pandemic were in sort of everything's on fire mode, and you're thinking about your business model, you're thinking about everything. And so ultimately, you can't get remote work right when everything else is on fire. And a lot of founders, I think, really just kind of gave up because it was hard. They didn't set those foundations. One little plug on our blog, we have a full, robust guide that I wrote that's all about how to get remote work right. Everything from compliance to how to think about the different countries where you hire, to how to get it right collaboration-wise once you're in the office. It's just a free blog post, so feel free to check that out as well. But I think it's really important to, if you're gonna choose remote, to be intentional around how you design how work gets done.
And I'll just kind of share my personal experience here. My current startup, Comprehensive, is remote. Well, I guess a couple of things we've tried to figure out to make that work. One is we are remote, but only in the US, so we have not kind of ventured in the sort of international territory yet. And so that helps at least kind of keep time zones consistent, makes collaboration a little bit easier. My co-founder's in New York City, I'm in San Francisco, so realistically, kind of remote was sort of the only way to go. And we have found a lot of advantages of doing that. Now, of course, kind of attracting talent and hiring is a lot easier when you're remote, because then you can sort of attract talent from anywhere, at least across the country for us. And then also a lot of employees who are used to working remotely or prefer to work remotely, now suddenly there are fewer companies that are offering that, and maybe the current employer is forcing kind of a return to the office. And so those can often be really great people to attract and hire into a company if you are remote, like we are. And then, but there are downsides, obviously. My startup before Comprehensive, a 401k company called Human Interest, I started that, in office. It was in 2015, so in office was sort of the norm. And certainly lots of benefits from collaboration and being able to just look next to the coworker next to you and just sort of chat about something in real time, and kind of just build sort of better camaraderie and team bonding that way. So we do kind of give that up going into kind of remote environment, and so trying to balance and offset that by trying to get the team together, every few months in person for a week, kind of on a company retreat, to just be able to really do a lot of the in-person brainstorming and collaboration that can help set the tone for the following months, and we are still back in remote.
And you touched on something in terms of remote work allowing people to hire from pretty much anywhere. And so how can companies use this hybrid work time to break their pipelines and hire a more inclusive workforce? And then, in addition to that, will AI help or hurt that cause?
I guess, from a hiring perspective in general, what we do is we do kind of a fair bit of sort of prospecting and sourcing in addition to just relying on employee referrals and a network. And so what remote work lets us do is just be able to kind of be agnostic to the employee's location. And so we don't sort of need to kind of require, they have to be in San Francisco or have to be in New York. And we can also kind of target companies that we know are shifting from remote back to in-office, in case there are kind of any employees that might be looking to go back into remote environment but can't with their current employer. So it just kind of makes us more competitive in general for talent, and kind of allows us to just really have kind of variety of people that we can consider instead of just folks in certain locations. I think compensation is also sort of something that you can be more competitive with if you're hiring across the U.S. For us, we kind of pay tier 1 U.S. salaries regardless of where in the country the employee works, which means if we're hiring from places like, even if it's like Austin or Denver or Salt Lake City and so on, that ends up meaning that we're sort of above market by paying sort of Bay Area, New York salaries, and then we kind of remain competitive if we are hiring from those top tier cities too.
Yeah, it's never been easier to hire a distributed team than it is today. The first time I worked for a remote first company was in 2016, and it was all services models if you want to hire internationally, or you hired contractors and you sort of went under the radar and hoped you didn't get caught, because it's typically a misclassification risk. But today, there's a big booth downstairs for remote.com. There's Deal, there's Oyster, all these productized companies that can help you hire anywhere. You can hire offshore teams entirely with a company like Terminal. There's tons of brands out there that make it really easy to do. And there's cost savings if you don't do a tier 1 everywhere, by kind of managing that out. And so I think back at Webflow, when we started, our strategy was hire the best talent where they are, no matter where they are, and we'll figure out how to hire them. So we had entities in 40 states out of 50 by the time we were 250 people, and we did a tiered compensation approach, tier 1 for a certain subset, and then 2 and 3, and it was always more competitive than the local market rate, but it was adjusted so that you found the cost savings, because ultimately a lot of companies end up running into trouble if they only hire, say, San Francisco salary no matter where you are, because you can hire fewer people for the dollar, and you have higher complexity in your build because you have to be compliant in each place. So it makes it really complicated. The partners make it really, really easy to do that. And so I think really being clear about why you're doing it, I would say, is the biggest key. Is it for cost savings? Is it to hire the best talent wherever they are at whatever cost? Really get clear on your why. And then for some companies, going international could be huge because, let's say, customer support. You want to have 24/7 customer support for your company, but you're small. The easiest way to do that is to hire people on different time zones. Same for, say, you want to have site reliability and engineering uptime. Engineers hate doing pager duty. You can have less of that if you have people around the world. So the benefits are huge, but you want to be clear on what those are that you're looking to drive, because there's always trade-offs. And if you try to get the best of everything, you're going to get stuck in a bunch of catch-22s.
And it's a little different at the exec level too, because as you hire for more and more senior roles, there's fewer and fewer people who can do that job to the standard that you're looking for. And so over the last few years, we've definitely seen as more of those executives have moved out of the coastal areas, compensation for executives does not have the same delta it used to have between, like, San Francisco and even Des Moines, Iowa, right? Where you may have had more of a cost of labor difference historically. In the exec level, especially at the C level, that's pretty much gone away because there is an understanding that the best of the best, the specialists, you have a very limited pool, and so you have to pay for that. And so especially at the exec level, there are more and more people who, you have to pay a tier 1 San Francisco, New York, Silicon Valley salary to who don't live here.
Yeah, you guys touched on some topics that I want to dive into. Yeah. First, speaking about competition and paying out for really big talent, how can a small startup attract talent away from big companies and hire for these what would be expensive roles? So how do you position yourself as a better solution?
Well, I think first of all, if somebody wants to come work for you and your company is maybe 100 people and has raised $30 or $40 million or whatever it is, they want to come work for you. Right, you're not going to win necessarily on salary, on money, on compensation. You're going to win on everything else that has to do with your company, you as a founder, things that make you special. And there is an equity component as well. Some people are very driven by having a piece of the business, seeing that upside, and being a part of that for whether it's 2, 3, 4, 10 years, and really doing something meaningful.
100%. Candidates will come to you with, this is the offer I got from OpenAI or some major company that can offer $1 million package to someone who's 2 years out of school, and you're like, I'm a seed stage company, I can't offer you that. But they're usually putting in, say it's from LinkedIn, for example, the liquidity of their shares in their total compensation, really breaking apart and understanding the component parts, getting really clear, using a comprehensive.io or other data tool to understand what is benchmark for your company, what is the stage that you want to play at, and who are you competing with, and how can you come up with an art plus science way to go about it. Be clear on that, and then put that to the side and focus as much as you possibly can on an opportunity-based sell. So when you're trying to hire candidates, if you make it about comp, you're playing on the defense, you're just playing ping pong back and forth. What makes you different? Who are you trying to focus on? How can you close them from day one? One question I always recommend people ask on the very first interview, the first time you talk to the candidate: why this company? Why this job? Why now? This question, there's no right or wrong, but you're taking notes so that when you go to close that candidate at the end, you can touch on how you hit every single thing that they said. You're showing them that you listen, that you understand them. And guess what? If it's $10K apart, people will choose the lower offer a lot of the time if the opportunity is better. I, for one, Webflow was my lowest offer of 3 when I took that job. I'm so glad I did, because ultimately that was the most competitive offer, looking hindsight, on how those companies all turned out respectively. And so how can you also get really good on selling on the future of your business? Don't get stuck in the nuts and bolts of what the equity is worth today, because gross value of a seed stage company or a Series A company is never going to compete with a public company or a very large, highly valued company. But it could be many multiples. You never want to promise exactly how much it could be worth in the future, but you can paint a picture about the vision, the mission, what you're trying to do, and bring them along on that potential that they're going to have a bigger role in closing, changing that potential with you, because they're a bigger part of the whole. If you're one of 10 or one of 20 employees, you are much more impactful on the end outcome of that company than if you're one of 100,000. So how can you help that person feel what they're looking for in the job from that first call to the end and win them on the opportunity itself?
Just to kind of zoom out, it, comparatively speaking, is easier than ever to be able to hire employees for kind of a small startup or an unknown company, just because of kind of the way that the tech hiring landscape has shifted over the past few years. So if you kind of think about, since COVID, we've kind of had 2 discrete phases of the tech hiring landscape. From 2020 to late 2022, we were kind of in this expansionary phase, right? Where capital was flowing, companies from startups to big tech were expanding, hiring rapidly. So there's a lot of competition for talent, and pay was rising every year because of that. And then starting in about late 2022, we kind of saw entering into the correction phase where there was a spike in tech layoffs. Companies started to slow or even kind of freeze hiring, which really meant that the balance of power kind of shifted from the employee to the employer. And now as we're kind of looking almost at the end of 2024, it's mostly kind of a continuation of what we've seen since late 2022, where we're kind of still very much in that correction territory, and big tech companies, still are either doing layoffs or not hiring to the extent that they used to be, and same with late-stage startups too. So I think, to your question, Dom, about kind of how can startups, be able to attract talent from later stage startups or bigger tech companies, it is easier now because of the supply and demand factor, and the fact that a lot of employees at these late stage startups and at these public tech companies now are realizing, wait, actually it's not as stable here as I thought it was going to be. And so why not go to an early stage startup where I can have a bigger impact and contribute more, have a kind of a better growth trajectory, work more closely and personally with the founders and the early employees. And yeah, it is obviously still risky, but maybe not as risky as I thought it was going to be compared to my late stage startup that's doing layoffs, my big tech company that's now suddenly in turmoil. So that kind of risk calculation has changed a little bit, and I think that does benefit the early stage startup founder.
And I feel like we can't talk about hiring without talking about retaining a workforce. And so what steps should employers take to ensure that they can retain their workforce at a time where salaries and benefits, especially work-life balance, can get quite competitive?
Yeah. So I guess probably this is my zone, right, as a ex-VP of people. So if you think about the entire life cycle, really understanding, like if you think about how you do this for your sales and marketing side, right, you think about the customer journey, you want to understand what is your customer experience, not just once you close the deal, but the delivery side too. What is their onboarding experience, right? And not just about your customers, but it's the exact same for your employees. So how are you thinking about the customer marketing side, the way you're thinking about your employee side? You're always trying to figure out how can I help them be successful, how to activate them in your company. It's a complete parallel path. And if you see those two side by side, it's so much easier to understand. And so you really want to plot through, what is the first 90 days for someone who joins our team? What does it look like? The biggest thing that I've noticed when companies and candidates don't work out post-hire is that sometimes, sure, it's the wrong candidate, but actually 8 times out of 10, it's the wrong job description. Like they didn't get the role scope right, or the onboarding didn't happen in a certain way, like critical pieces of information were missed. So really thinking clearly from the day you design the job before you go to post it out on the world, what does the first 90 days for this person look like? What are the projects you want them to do in the first 6 to 12 months? Like what are these buckets of work? Not only will that help you make the person more successful when they join, but it's gonna make it a lot easier to sell the job because you can actually talk about the stuff the person is doing. Not we need somebody with like Ruby on Rails experience. We need somebody who has the ability to build these types of things because this is what we're gonna be doing together. And now you're also selling them. We talk about the opportunity-based sell. I want to know what I'm going to be working on when I join this company, not what skill. I know what skills I have. I know what this job does. What will I be doing? And that can be a great way to kind of excite the person about the problems you're really solving on the ground, and then attach those to milestones of what will happen at 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. And then from there, thinking clearly around how do we want to reward people? How do we want to recognize people at this company? And it all goes back to your culture. Before you can do those things thoughtfully, you really want to be clear, like what kind of society are we building? What kind of citizens do we want to have as employees of our team? What's our culture, and how do we tie those things back in to each of those steps? Onboarding, promotion cycles, performance reviews, anything that you're building, you can tie it back, and it will all feel much more cohesive, like a narrative, just like you're building for your customers, so that they feel that cohesive experience as well.
Well, and to that, I think just remembering that you have a team full of humans, right? And like talk to them as their people and remember that they're people. And all of these things are changing. If there's communication that's going wrong or the job spec is wrong, talk to them, right? There's a couple of schools of thought on your workforce in general. There are people who say, okay, hire fast, fire fast. And then there are people who say, okay, well, let's hire and then we can find new roles for people, right, if they're not working out. And so I think part of it is decide how you want to build your team, because if you want to build a team that is going to be with you for a long time, you have to recognize that those people are going to change as they're with you. They're going to change in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 5 years, 10 years. They're going to go through different life stages. They're going to go through a lot of personal hardships, a lot of personal wins. They have lives. And so if you want to retain people, think of them as humans, as part of your team. And they don't just have one purpose, they have many, and they can evolve and change just as your company evolves and changes.
Yeah, and Lauren, kind of speaking to your point about it's about the people, probably the biggest relationship for an employee is with their manager. And it's kind of that saying, people don't quit their company, they quit their manager, their boss. And obviously, there's both sides of that. I think both are important, but it's kind of, hard to overstate the importance of that manager relationship with the employee. So if you're an early stage startup, maybe the founders are the managers, right? And so then I think Lauren's advice is really good. It's like, try to understand from each employee what's motivating them, what are their goals, why are they here, are they here to learn, are they here to grow, are they here for the compensation, are they here to see the business grow, are they here for interesting challenges, are they here for the role, right? And make sure that you understand what's motivating them, what's incentivizing them, and do what you can as a founder, which you have a lot of control over, to be able to align what you offer the employee to what they care about, and that could be different for every single employee you have.
Yeah,
go ahead.
On that, you should be having an employee engagement survey. Even if you're small, you can make one on a Google form. Basically, there's 12 questions. Look up the Gallup 12 if you search for it. These are the 12 indicators that are research proven time and time again are the biggest indicators of somebody retaining at your company. They're things like, someone cares about me as a person at work. I have a friend at work. I have the tools and resources I need to do my job. And if you survey people, say, twice a year on those factors, you're going to get a good sense ahead of time of some of the things that could be going awry at your company. Sorry.
Yeah.
And having a friend is so important. I've had previous roles where the thing keeping me there was having one or two best friends, right? Because it was so important and powerful, and we were doing such great work together. It was one of those things where having a best friend at work, or a close work best friend, having people you really love to work with was just so important.
Yeah, that's a great point. Kind of for bigger companies, then pay attention to certain inflection points for the employee. Like if their best friend at work leaves, might be a good time to check in with that employee to sort of make sure that they are still engaged and motivated. If an employee, switches their manager, or the manager leaves and they have to, get a new manager, that's also a great time to kind of check in afterwards, make sure that handoff is going smoothly, because those can be kind of critical sort of stay or leave decisions for the employee.
And this is an area that's getting really interesting with AI. So in the past, all you could do was survey and hope for the best on predictive behaviors and kind of go from there. We now have tools out in the workforce that can actually predict these things for you and notify you on a dashboard. So we've invested in a company called Presidio that is a company that literally does this work. So it'll input things like Slack activity and Zoom activity and kind of do all the analytics of your company to help you predict who are my most likely top performers to leave. You can ask more robust questions than having to guess. These things are evolving in real time over time, and I think that the future of AI in HR is going to be really interesting to help us optimize how we really retain our top performers.
And I definitely want everyone's opinion on, something that I'm obsessed with are these debates on if young workers are different, if Gen Zers are different.
They are.
And so I wanted to get your thoughts on if young workers are different, if they have different expectations, and how can companies kind of meet this new expectation that younger employees have?
I mean, every generation that is new to the workforce, it was the same with millennials, right? I mean, we remember when boomers criticized millennials, and now millennials were criticizing Gen Z.
I love Gen Z.
I love Gen Z too. I mean, clearly, I love Gen Z, but I think there's an appreciation for how much they push the boundaries and force you to think. And I think you can either be crotchety about it and become a curmudgeon around the upcoming generation, or you can say, gosh, what do they have to offer? They look at the world so different. They were born with a phone in their hand. They have a totally different worldview. What do they bring to the table? And let's listen to what they have to say, because what are the themes they have? They have to love and be passionate about their work. Gosh, is that such a bad thing? I love and am passionate about my work, and so I want to hear what they have to say and how we can spread those learnings.
Yeah, I mean, Gen Z has been in the workforce for maybe 5 years at the oldest. And so if you think about what happened over the last 5 years, we saw pandemic, we saw major amounts of layoffs, as we know so well from layoffs to FYI. These numbers are inundating, they're unprecedented, they're massive. And so there's a lack of loyalty amongst Gen Z in the workforce that we're seeing in early data. We have a state of talent report that kind of highlights the different patterns of the generations, and Gen Z is staying in their jobs an average of, I think, 1.1 years as of 2023, whereas older generations are staying in much longer, double or more. And so there's this notion that work can be a little bit more transient. It's a little bit of a this for that relationship, but that challenges you to do better. What can you do to retain these folks and keep them there longer? They don't see the same path of like, how do I move up the corporate ladder in the same way that we do? But we're still learning. It's really early days. These folks may change and evolve over time as the workforce changes with them. But I think it's really important to have that perspective in your workforce and have a really diverse set of people, because especially if your customer base reflects Gen Z, you want to make sure that you have that DNA in your workforce, just as you would for any other group that's reflected in your customer base.
And the one thing I'll add there is that I think with Gen Z, the norm of transparency is a lot different than for previous generations of workers. Layoffs used to be a taboo topic. No employee wanted to sort of have that scarlet letter that said that they were laid off. But now, especially with Gen Z, you can see people posting on TikTok that they got laid off.
And then they find a new job through
right,
that too,
and that
which
actually
is really
helps
brilliant.
them because they get the visibility to be able to land their next role. And then same with pay. Compensation used to be a taboo topic. You don't discuss your salary. Now you have folks on social media that are very open about what they're getting paid and sharing that. So that's kind of sort of nudging companies to embrace transparency, which personally I think is a great thing, because it just kind of sets better expectations and alignment between employees and the company, and you kind of have the workforce driving those trends. But I think companies, if they can get ahead of it and kind of be proactive about how they can use transparency and be transparent with their employees, that can actually be a really great advantage and differentiator for them and their brand when it comes to recruiting and retaining talent.
Yeah.
And along that note, though, make sure you don't lose your more experienced employees, right? Because you still need folks who have 20, 30, 35 years of experience building these companies. And so if you cater too much to the expectations of maybe Gen Z or even earlier millennials, you do risk losing folks who might see the world or the workforce a different way. So that becomes interesting tension and interesting thing to figure out as you build your company, because you need you need people from interns all the way up to incredibly established specialists, staff level folks, C-level executives, and board members.
And this is why culturally it's so important to get buttoned up early on with what kind of culture are we building? How do we want conflict to happen at our company? Do we want to invite it? Do we want to shut it down? Like, what are we trying to do? And the refreshing thing about Gen Z pushing for more transparency and kind of accountability from employers is that it's improving outcomes for people in the world. So in the past, you wouldn't know how much you could expect to be paid, and then people who knew who to ask and knew who to talk to were getting paid more than those who didn't know. Now there's legal requirements in many states to post, pay bans and so forth. All these pushes are really healthy things happening over time, but it puts a lot of accountability on all of us who are sitting in the seat as founders, employers, to really understand how do we design something in a way that actually meets the requirements that are now being expected of me to attract and retain a workforce in the future. And so really, again, that's where I would push for compensation data, like knowing your stuff in advance and getting really clear on who we are and who we are not, and calling in those people that align with the values that you hold and the kind of company that you're building.
And I just want to remind everyone, we are doing a Q&A in a few moments, so people can line up to the mics. You touched on not catering so much to Gen Z that you lose more experienced people. I saw a video on Twitter where someone was saying that you should never hire anyone under 30. Surely that's like a myth and semi-illegal, right?
Yes. I don't think it's controversial to say that you should hire people who are over 30. So I think it's not an either or, it's a yes and, like a both. You want to have a diverse workforce across your team. It's going to create healthier outcomes. There's so much data. Look at any McKinsey report from past to see that this is the truth. We don't need to go over that. But what ends up happening when you take kind of like literally the things that people say, even us on this stage or really known speakers out in the world, and say, oh, I'm going to follow this rule to a T, you end up in a little bit of like black and white thinking that can be pretty harmful to your outcome. If you said, I'm never going to hire anyone over 30, I don't know, I'm not going to make anyone do a show of hands, but I'm pretty sure you would not be willing to hire yourself or like 85% of the people in this room. So I would say there's 3 main reasons why you should definitely hire people over 30. Number 1, experience. They have more of it. They've seen the movie before. They're not going to make first-timer mistakes that we've all made. Number 2, they tend to be more engaged in your workforce. So every employee engagement survey will usually show the older workers, if you segment it out, they want to stay longer. Again, we know Gen Z is leaving jobs faster. You need people who are going to stay and see through the cycles of your business and be happy doing it. They have less expectations for what the role of the employer is in their life. They're there to do a job. And then number 3, and probably most importantly, is in case you didn't know, it's illegal to discriminate based on age or many other protected class factors. It's sort of legal 101. I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice, but there are protections in place. So do be careful when you take kind of advice from folks. There's always a nugget of gold in there. Like, yes, do hire people under 30, but that's not a no, don't hire people over.
Wait, also, since when was 30 the cutoff for being considered old? I'm insulted by that.
Well, legally it's 40 is the cutoff, and I'm now part of that class, so it's fine.
I actually wanted to ask you, Roger, a question in terms of you publish salary data, and when it comes to building a startup, how much money should a company spend on hiring talent immediately versus like outsourcing some talent and hiring like fractional workers?
Ooh, I mean, that's a really kind of tricky question. It's a, very much an it depends answer, right? I think it obviously depends on kind of your company and your goals and kind of what budget you have available. Have you raised capital? How much? What kind of company are you building and what does it take to build that company? What roles are important and so on. But I guess, I think there's 2 questions in there. Like, one is, what is my strategy for kind of the talent I'm hiring for, right? Am I hiring full-time? Am I hiring fractional? Am I hiring domestic? Am I hiring international? And that really just kind of depends on the company. You can say, hey, maybe I'm gonna, have my engineering be in the U.S., but maybe I'll supplement with fractional on the marketing side, for example. And so that's kind of one question. And then the other question is, all right, how much do I pay them? And that's certainly where kind of market data, like what we publish for free at comprehensive.io, can come in handy. Is that you can kind of see what are similar companies paying for similar roles in these locations, just to ensure that you're setting pay competitively, which is important for 2 reasons. One is that it helps you make sure that you can hire the people that you want. You don't want to accidentally kind of set pay too low if it's important for you to hire that role. And then also from a budgeting perspective, you ultimately can have probably very limited resources if you're just starting a company. And so you want to know, okay, if I want to hire these 4 roles, how much is that going to cost me? And you can kind of play around with it. Okay, if I hire them in San Francisco and at this seniority, then I might have to pay this. But if I hire them junior in a different location, it's this. And you can make these trade-offs for, okay, ultimately, how do I then kind of allocate my budget, if you will, for hiring to make sure I kind of land the roles that are most important to me. And you can kind of assess these different trade-offs by looking at market data to see, what you would expect each of these hires to cost.
And okay, so I'm going to jump to some of the audience questions. We'll start right here.
Thank you, speakers, for the insight. My name is Eliza, and my question is, considering latest developments, what is the ideal hire in 2025? What are the core traits, in your opinion?
I think that's a tricky question because it's so role specific. So the ideal hire is going to vary tremendously based on your company and your needs in that business, as well as like what you define the role to be. And so I think the biggest thing I would say is get really clear on the competencies of a role.
I guess I'm not really about technical competencies.
Technical? Oh, so
not about technical competencies, but human kind of, in terms of social perspective.
Well, everyone's different. I feel like all types of personalities and traits have a place in the workforce. So I wouldn't say there is one ideal, because again, it is very function specific too. And also team and culture and really very, just, it's a very hard question to answer because everybody has a place in the workforce, and there is really no ideal set of personality traits to be successful.
But I would look for alignment between the individual and the company and team. So you want ideally someone who is excited about what your company does, is drawn to the mission, and is a fit for what you have to offer in terms of the role and the growth of that role.
Yeah.
So if someone's looking for a ultimate career path that does not align with what you might be able to offer, that might be something that you factor in, because ultimately, even if you get them in the door, they might not stay or be happy for very long. And similarly, you want to make sure that you have something kind of unique that you can offer them that makes you the logical choice compared to all these other companies that they could be applying to too. So I think kind of really trying to understand, what it is that your company can offer with this role and this position and this company, and how does that line up with the individual's goals and what they're hoping to get out of their role. That's really, really important, because two things. One, if you learn that up front, then how you stand in terms of are you going to be able to hire this person? Are they going to accept your offer if you extend it to them? And then also, even once they join, how long are they stay at your company? Are they going to be there for a while, or are they going to leave the minute that kind of another job comes along?
My name is Dylan. Thank you so much for all the different answers and questions that you guys were able to give about hiring people. Do you think for startups nowadays, it's different in the approach of the age of people you're looking for? How do you find the balance between, like we said, older people that have experience versus young, ambitious people that want to join? How do you find that balance? Does it depend on the company, or?
Well, there are plenty of older people who are still ambitious. But I think, again, if you are hiring for something specific, like ambition or hunger, I think have that be your filter rather than age, which obviously illegal, but also you hire a bunch of 22-year-old bros, you get a bro culture, right? And then a mom like me with 2 little kids gets an allergic reaction, and no matter how fantastic I am, there's no way I'm joining that company. So I think part of it is figure out what you really need in your team and forget about age. If you want hunger, hire for hunger.
It's competency-based hiring. So you're constructing a whole team. We work with a lot of founders this is their first job, let alone having managed a team before or hired before. We see a lot of that. And I think the idea is, how do you bring the right people around you that can be the right team construction for you? And there's going to be a blend. It's going to be a diverse set of individuals across all sorts of things, but you want to get the right people in the right seats. So if you look at your own construction of be very clear on your own self-awareness of strengths and gaps. And so if you're trying to construct your leadership team, for example, you might say, hey, my background is in go-to-market. I feel pretty strong there. My gap is in product. I'm making this up. I don't know your background. And so I might bring in my most senior experienced person in product, because that's an area where I don't have a lot of confidence that I know what great looks like. The best founders get really good at hiring by knowing what great looks like, so cultivating that. One big tip I would say is, if you're unsure, talk to your network, talk to your venture capital partners and say, can you help me find someone who is really excellent at this one thing? Not going to be a candidate for me probably, but they'll help me understand what signals I should look for. And then again, agnostic to all the demographic factors, you can figure out who is actually pattern matched to what great looks like, and try to ignore what they look like, age-wise, all the things. Just try to understand what kinds of experiences and skills do they have. And competency-based hiring is a model that I like, where essentially what you're doing is extracting what the competencies are for a job outside of the role, come up with 6 to 8 things that are important for each role, and then try to figure out how do you find that. And I would go towards more experienced, where you feel like the current team has less, and try to balance. It's almost like a basketball team of you want some people that are really tenured who know the sport better, and then you want some people who are young and energetic and going to shake things up. You're building a team, and so really think about the total construction.
Thank you.
How you doing? I'm Brian, and I'm over 30, so I'm really glad to hear my race isn't run yet. But the clock is clearly ticking. So employers invest so much in referral programs to try and get their employees to get the data shows it's cheaper, better performers stay longer. I'm curious, have you used it much at your own companies, and what's sort of stopping you scaling it further? or like even tapping into wider networks, like alumni networks of your, people once they leave?
Yeah. Referrals make up about a third of all company hires at startups, pretty much from 1 to 1,000 people, and usually it's a bigger number at the beginning because you're hiring people you can't take risks as easily, and then as you get bigger, you can have a broader group. And the downside of referrals is that if you kind of stay internal within your own team, you might become a little bit more silent. Like you kind of run out of connections at some point. And so bringing in people, 66% from outside of your own referral group is going to be a positive thing. There are also platforms out today. There's a platform called Liftoff that you could look up that does external referrals. So they find these like known connectors. I think I'm one of the connectors in the early group. And they'll actually pay people bonuses, like you'd pay your internal team, to make hires on your behalf. So they'll send you thoughtful referrals. So you're opening up your aperture, especially if your team is tiny and you're trying to figure out, like, we've already tapped out our whole network. Where do we go from here?
Well, and referrals are just great for your employer brand, right? If you have all of your employees out there telling their friends how fantastic a place it is that they work, that's only good for you. So it's just a great tool to have.
And that is sadly all we have time for today. But maybe you guys can talk to them, you see them around. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the program today. Thank you.
Find us on LinkedIn.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.